Good evening, everybody. Today, I'm here, well, we mentioned my role as ADTRAN's CTO for EMEA and APAC, and I also serve as the President for Fibre to the Home Council for Europe. Today, I'm formally in the capacity of my ADTRAN role as CTO. So, if any of the messaging might conflict with Fibre to the Home Council messaging, it's because I'm here in ADTRAN's capacity. Today what I want to talk to you about is ultimately going to focus in on a particular copper access technology called G.fast. And G.fast is very rapidly becoming one of the most versatile copper access technologies for ultra-fast broadband delivery throughout Europe. And we think here within ADTRAN that there's a unique combination between the Greek telecoms market and the technologies that already exist in it and what G.fast can deliver to really position Greece at the forefront of digital societies within Europe. I just want to set a bit of a backdrop with regard to some of the market drivers that we're seeing for ultra-fast broadband technologies. About 3 to 4 weeks ago, we saw a publication come out of the EU Commission. Commissioner Oettinger shared his future vision for what he refers to as a gigabit society communication. And really what that's about is it's setting a new digital agenda for Europe as we go forward. If we look at the current targets that exist within Europe today, most of those targets were defined over 10 years ago. And they're only now beginning to come close to completion at this stage. So it's not surprising that we're starting to see new targets be delivered from the EU Commission. And ultimately, within those targets, some of the key messages that it's focusing towards is, first of all, what they refer to as a gigabit society. That's the new target, that's the new buzzword that's doing the rounds within, within Brussels in general. What it drives is an update to the previous targets. So for those who are not familiar with the European targets for broadband coverage, what they had stated was that by 2020, 100% of European households would have access to 30 megabits per second of broadband, and 50% of households would have taken 100 megabit broadband services. With these new proposals, they're increasing the target, and what they're saying is by 2020, 100% of households within Europe should have access to 100 megabits per second, and that by 2025, those targets, those capacities should be upgradable to gigabit capacity. So the full focus of this publication from the EU Commission is on very high capacity networks. And that has a number of implications with regard to the technologies that service providers are looking towards to deploy across Europe. The full intent from the Commission is really to promote much deeper fibre penetration, a very strong focus on fibre to the basement or fibre to the premises. And that will serve as a foundational layer for the 5G networks that we're going to see emerging from 2018 onwards. However, they recognize that they need to be technology neutral. So what they've put in place is bandwidth and latency requirements, performance characteristics, if you will, for the different available technologies within the industry, that they must hit those performance criteria. Cable TV networks, or coax networks, or DOCSIS networks as we know them, they meet the requirements. They're able to deliver on the latency and the capacity requirements that have been set down within this proposal. G.fast as a technology can meet the performance requirements, but it depends on how and where you deploy it. G.fast, because of its versatility as a technology, can be deployed quite far away from customers, which has a negative impact on the overall bandwidth it can deliver, or it can be deployed very close to customers, which allows for very, very high-speed broadband services to be delivered. And I think in the context of the Greek market and the physical construct of the copper networks, that very close deployment of G.fast to the subscribers within the market here is very much a reality. Technologies like VDSL2 and vectored VDSL2, based on the guidelines that the Commission have published, fall short of the performance requirements. Ultimately, this is going to have an impact with regard to regulatory response and state aid qualifications. When service providers seek to build out their networks and they try and attract in funding from the EU, they will have performance requirements imposed on the solutions that they're seeking to deploy. and that will determine whether they're eligible for funding or not. On the flip side of things, we also have the consumer pull. So what I described previously was kind of one of the big pushes within the industry. We also have the consumer pull, where consumer applications, quite often not selected discreetly by the users themselves, but quite often pushed by the consumer electronic manufacturers. If we look at the example of 4K TV, for example, 4K TV is expected to hit 25% household penetration within the next 3 years. And if you think about how 4K content gets consumed, you can't go down to the local Blockbuster store and rent a 4K Blu-ray disc or whatever the next version is coming out. It's all going to be streamed. Every one of those 4K TVs is a smart TV. It's connected. So that content will all be streamed, will have big bandwidth requirements. We've got technologies like virtual reality, where the demand for these technologies is huge. If we look at some of the big announcements that came out recently, companies like Oculus that launched their Rift headset, and they sold out within 15 minutes. HTC followed a couple of weeks later and sold 10,000 headsets within 10 minutes. We're streaming here with 360 VR as I speak to you right now. This technology is becoming democratized very quickly. I can now go out and buy a 360 VR camera for less than €300. So it's no longer extremely expensive technology, it's becoming within reach of our children. We've also got augmented reality being a big push from the likes of Microsoft. It's expected to be an even larger market with $120 billion of revenue forecasted by 2020. We've got the whole Internet of Everything, which is driving more connectivity and more capacity. And then we've also got trends like the over-the-top service delivery. On screen I give the example of Netflix. And with Netflix today, I know this figure is out of date because every time I present this presentation I've got to update the figures because they're growing so rapidly. But basically it shows that they've got over 85 million subscribers today. Now think about Netflix. Netflix can be viewed on every smartphone, every tablet, every games console, every PC, every smart TV in the world. So it's got an addressable market of hundreds of millions of devices that they can target. So at 85 million, they're far from done with growing. Fibre to the home, the growth rate that we're seeing in fibre to the home is really, really positive. We're seeing stronger growth over the last couple of years, particularly here in Europe, than we've ever seen within the market. But the challenge with fibre to the home is it remains stubbornly slow. You've got to build a whole new infrastructure in parallel, and that takes time. A recent conversation I had with the French regulator, they were talking about they were going to hit a run rate of 2 million connected homes per year. Sounds fantastic until you realize it's going to take them over 10 years to reach their targets. You know, so when you put it in that perspective, it's unfortunately a little bit slow. And then we've got the cloudification of everything. Anything that can be digitized, the days of buying it in a physical format and bringing it into your home are gone. It'll be streamed over and over again. If you don't believe me, look at what your kids do. Okay, my kids stream 3 or 4 things in parallel at the same time. I don't know how they consume it. Ultimately, this is driving evolutions within the technology. And what I think is very interesting with regard to the Greek market versus some of the more advanced markets within Europe. If I look at the advanced markets, and apologies, I'm going to use a laser pointer here, which is always bad form, but it helps focus in on where I'm talking about. The advanced markets within Europe, I would refer to as being coming close to the end of their 4th generation deployments. With 4th generation deployments, they're completing their vectored VDSL rollouts. They're completing their DOCSIS 3.0 upgrades. You know, they've nearly 80% of the build done at this stage, and the new rollouts are beginning to slow down. In those markets, they're looking forward towards the 5th generation of access technologies. So the cable guys are looking at DOCSIS 3.1 and how they deploy that. The traditional telco guys for their copper deployments are looking at technologies like G-Fast. And for the fibre to the home guys, they're moving past what GPON could deliver at 2.5 gigabit per second, and they're moving on to the next generation PON standards, which can deliver 10 gigabit per second symmetric. What's interesting about Greece is, if I look at the Greek market, if I look at the Greek market, arguably the Greek market is coming close to the end of the 3rd generation of deployment. There's a limited amount of VDSL already deployed within the market. Vectoring is just beginning to happen at this point with VDSL. The bulk of the market is serviced with ADSL technology. And with that, I think it creates a unique opportunity, because what's happened is the industry and the technologies have continued to forge ahead. If you look at the Greek market with the technologies that are deployed today, and if you look at the physical construct of the market, where a significant portion of the population can be reached within 200 meters of an active cabinet, that allows for scenarios where GFAST can be deployed in those cabinets. And with the future amendments to GFAST, gigabit services can be launched from those locations. And that creates a backdrop where very quickly you could deploy gigabit services on a nationwide basis far faster than any of your peers within Europe. If we look at the innovations that are happening within GFAST, and I'm not going to read you down through this list because I'm going to go through the main ones individually just to explain them to you. But I can safely say, in all my years within telecom, and that's over 20 years now at this point, I have never seen so much innovation pushed into any one particular technology. The amount of R&D dollars that are being spent on advancing G.fast has surpassed every other technology that's preceded it. If I look at some of the advancements and the implications that they can have, one of the implications is within the industry, and I apologize for those that are not technical, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here, but I'll try and keep it at a high level. One of the things that we've played around with within the industry is what we call the signal-to-noise ratio margin. And that basically, in layman's terms, is how loud the signal needs to be for the receiver to hear it versus the background noise. So to use today's analogy, can you guys all hear me down the back? Great, so the signal-to-noise ratio margin is high enough, okay, just to give you the sense versus the background noise outside. If we look at the implications of lowering the signal-to-noise ratio margin versus what we thought would be needed originally when GFAST was being deployed as a technology, we can see when we lower that at a distance of 200 meters, which remember most of your subscribers are within 200 meters of cabinets today, you're getting up to combined data rates of about 550 megabits per second. Now picture that to your ADSL connection today, okay? It's quite a big uplift. We've other advancements as well. If we look at what we refer to as the bit loading, so that's how much data I can cram into a GFAST signal. GFAST was originally designed around cramming in 12 bits per tone. So for each signal that we send down the line, we cram in 12 bits of data into that. And what we've done now is we've amended the standard in what we refer to as Amendment 2 to squeeze in 14 bits per tone. It's not a huge increase, it gives us about a 15% improvement. But when you start to combine all these small improvements together, you get a much greater performance overall. We've also changed the transmit power. The original transmit power was focused towards 4 dBm. They've doubled that transmit power. For subscribers who are on slightly longer loops, we can give them again about another 15% performance increase. So again, you're starting to look after people that are in the more rural area. One of the other areas that GFAST is extended to is over coaxial cable. And with coaxial cable, that allowed us to bring in a new capability, a capability called dynamic timing allocation, which we've now since extended onto twisted pair cables as well. And with dynamic timing allocation, I can change the upstream-downstream ratio so that if I'm downloading, I can give you more download capacity. Or if I'm uploading, I can give you more upload capacity. So a service provider can begin to sell symmetric-like services to their subscribers. That's just an electronic implementation of what it looks like on an oscilloscope. Some of the other things to give consideration to, and this is very important in the Greek context. At the moment, there's very little VDSL within the network. If you look at the difference between the performance here at 200 meters versus the performance here at 200 meters, the top dashed line, where you're getting around 550 megabits per second download, is where you're not having to coexist with VDSL. The bottom dashed line is where you do have to coexist with VDSL. And that's why we think it's important if you take that leapfrog approach and forget about vectored VDSL and move forward with GFAST, you can avail of that higher capacity. In 2017, very early in 2017, we'll start to see the next generation chipsets, and they'll allow us to double the spectrum that GFAST can use. So it can go all the way up to 212 megahertz of capacity. So you can effectively double the bandwidth that you can deliver to customers. So when you've got a target that you're trying to deliver a gigabit of capacity to subscribers, Amendment 3 with 212 megahertz will allow for that to happen. If you look here, with Amendment 3 at 100 meters, it's getting over 1.5 gigabit per second. So hugely powerful for gigabit services, but with regard to deployment and time to market, it allows Greece to get to market much, much faster than its peers with a gigabit service offering. So in summary, the consumer appetite for more capacity and new service innovation persists. You know, we see devices like this cropping up all the time, and consumers are only too quick to lap them up. The EU Commission Gigabit Society targets have technology choice implications. So you do need to be careful, particularly the service providers in the room, in what technologies they lean towards. Fibre to the home, I wear my Fibre to the Home Council hat for this statement, wherever you can do it, you should always do it. But I am realistic that it does take time to roll out. Ultimately, full spectrum G-Fast, coupled with the unique scenarios within the Greek market, creates a great opportunity for Greece to really put itself at the forefront of digital society versus its EU peers. Thank you very much.